Here's a question nobody asked you at your last birthday party. What if everything you think you know about this stage of your life is completely wrong? Not in a scary way, in a good way. Because a major new global report from one of the world's leading research organizations just confirmed something I've suspected for a while. The years between 55 and 75 are not a slow wind down. They are, and I want you to hear this clearly, the most economically powerful, psychologically rich, and personally transformative decades of your entire adult life. And here's the kicker. Almost nobody is talking to you about it. Today, we're going to change that. Let me introduce you to a word. It's new, it's a little awkward to say, and once you hear it, you won't be able to unhear it. Middlescence. Coined by author Barbara Waxman and now formally adopted by the Edelman Longevity Lab in their 2026 global report, The 100-Year Life is Here. The definition: a transformative life stage between 55 and 75, characterized by reinvention, identity shift, and untapped potential. Sound familiar? It should. Think about what adolescence did for our understanding of teenagers. Before we had that word, that stage of life was just confusing turbulence. Once we named it, we could understand it, study it, support it, and eventually celebrate it. Middlescence does the same thing for us. It says, what you're feeling, that restless sense that the coat you've been wearing for 30 years suddenly doesn't quite fit, that's not a crisis. That's not decline. That is a life stage, with its own identity, its own momentum, and its own enormous potential. Now, I know some of you are thinking, that sounds nice, but is it actually true? Or is this just feel-good content dressed up as science? Fair question. Let's look at the numbers. The Edelman report analyzed spending patterns, consumer behavior, and demographic data across multiple countries. Here's what they found. People over 55 control more than half of all global consumer spending. More than half. And yet, they receive less than 10% of marketing investment. The most economically powerful consumer group on the planet is, by almost every measure, the most ignored. And it gets better, or rather more absurd. The report found that in the U.S. alone, under-engaging and underemploying people over 50 costs the economy up to $850 billion in GDP every single year. In Europe, what researchers are calling the silver economy, goods and services for the 55-plus market, is worth nearly 6 trillion euros and growing at roughly 5% annually. This isn't a niche finding. This is a structural blind spot in how our entire economy thinks about age. Now, here's what I find particularly satisfying about all of this. For years, the advertising industry has obsessively chased younger consumers. The assumption being that you capture someone young, you have them for life. But the Edelman report challenges that directly. It says, if someone is 55 today, they may have 50 more years of commercial and personal life ahead of them. But let's move from the economics to the lived reality. Because data is one thing. What does middlescence actually look like in practice? The Edelman report tracked 6 pillars of brain health, things like physical activity, mental challenges, and social connection, and found that more than 60% of adults over 50 engage in at least 4 of those pillars 3 or more days a week. That is not the behavior of a generation that has given up. That is a generation that is deliberately, actively investing in its own longevity. Travel? 70% of adults over 50 plan to travel this year. They took an average of 3.6 trips in 2025. Nearly half are planning an international trip. Fitness? A study cited in the report found that people over 55 are actually more interested in fitness and mobility, 76%, than those under 55, at 68%. Let that sink in for a moment. And then there's what the report calls the emotional dimension. Research from Pew and others consistently shows that emotional well-being, your sense of contentment, your ability to handle stress, your satisfaction with life, actually peaks during your 60s and 70s. Not your 20s, not your 30s, your 60s and 70s. Here's the part of this that I think is most useful for you personally, And it's the reason the word middlescence matters beyond the economics. Many people in this life stage report something that's hard to describe. You're accomplished. You've built things, a career, a family, a life. And yet, somewhere in your mid to late 50s or into your 60s, something shifts. The things that used to define you start to feel less yours, like you're wearing someone else's identity. And if nobody has told you this before, that feeling is normal. It is documented. It is a feature of this life stage, not a flaw in you. Adolescence gave us a framework for understanding why teenagers feel unmoored even when nothing is technically wrong. Middlescence does the same. The question, "Who am I now, really?" is not a sign that something has gone wrong in your 60s. It is actually a sign that you're entering one of the most generative periods of your life. Purpose, power, and play, as the Edelman report puts it, finally all intersect. The question is, are you going to engage with that? Or are you going to let someone else's outdated narrative tell you it's time to coast? So here's what I want you to do this week, and it's simple, but I want you to actually do it. Write down, on paper, not in your head, 3 answers to this question. What am I curious about that I've never had time for? Not what you should be doing, not what anyone else expects. What genuinely makes you curious? A language, a craft, a business idea, a place you've never been. This exercise matters because the Edelman data shows middlescents are fundamentally exploratory and future-facing. You are not winding down. You are, if you choose to engage with it, gearing up for what might be the most interesting chapter yet. Curiosity is the engine of middlescence. Your only job this week is to find out what's in yours. The world hasn't caught up to what you actually are yet. The marketers haven't, the media hasn't, but the research has. And now you have. You are not past your prime. You are in the middle of a life stage that has more economic power, more emotional depth, and more potential for reinvention than almost any other. If this landed for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because every week on this channel, we're going to keep making the case that your sharpest years are still ahead. Stay sharp.